Number 5 on this list is Robert the Doll. Robert the Doll is one of the most haunted and cursed dolls on the entire planet. Ghosts and Gravestones says the story of Robert the Doll dates back to the early 1900s when a young boy named Eugene Robert Otto was given a one-of-a-kind handmade doll by a servant that worked for his parents in his home. Eugene, who everybody called Gene, named the doll Robert and quickly became attached to his new friend. The home where Eugene lived, now called the Artist's House, is located at 534 Eaton Street and was built between 1890 and 1898. It was here that Eugene was given Robert the doll and where a friendship that lasted throughout his lifetime and beyond was forged. While he seemed like an ordinary cloth doll, it wasn't long before Robert was involved in strange and somewhat terrifying events. The first hint that something out of the ordinary was happening was one night when Gene, who was only 10 years old, awoke to find Robert the doll sitting at the end of his bed, staring at him. Moments later, his mother was awakened by his screams for help and the sounds of furniture being overturned in her son's bedroom. Gene cried for help, begging his mother to rescue him. When she was finally able to wrench the locked door open, she saw poor Gene curled up in fear on his bed, his room in shambles, and Robert the doll sitting at the foot of the bed. And all the child could say was Robert did it. Now, this was the first instance where Robert was acting up, but there have been tons of experiences since then where this doll is just doing things that really shouldn't be doing. He now lives in East Martello where visitors flock to see him, although it's a bad idea. There are letters and notes all around Robert from people that have come to see him, all begging for Robert's forgiveness. Apparently, taking a picture of Robert without his permission will cause him to start to haunt you. This curse has affected hundreds to thousands of people, and they all usually end up coming back to Robert begging for freedom from this curse. At this point, paranormal investigators have learned that messing with Robert really isn't the best idea, and just leaving this doll alone, probably the smartest thing to do. Number 4 on this list is the Screaming Skull. Last I checked, if there is no meat on the bone, then a skull shouldn't be screaming. That's kind of what's going down with this one extremely haunted skull in Burton Agnes Hall, England. Instablog says, what if you touch an object and then you hear terrible, deafening screams? That is precisely what happens when you touch this skull at an Elizabethan manor in England. Burton Agnes Hall is the house of Catherine Ann Griffith, who was brutally murdered by numerous bullies in 1620. Her skull still rests inside the house. Why? Because whenever somebody tried to take it out of the house, what happened next terrified them to the bone. People who have tried to touch or disturb that skull have reported seeing a scary ghost walk in and utter a deafening scream. This scared the people so much that they actually ran out of the house in terror. If you're up for a scary challenge, then this might be your chance to prove your mettle to the world, but for the weak-hearted ones, it's wise to stay away. And yeah, guys, I mean, I agree with that article right there. Probably best not to mess with this thing. I mean, a bunch of paranormal investigators won't even go here anymore. If a bunch of paranormal investigators think that this area is too scary for them, then sorry guys, I'm tapping out. It's way too scary for me too. Number 3 on this list is the Maori warrior masks. Now, these warrior masks hold a curse that won't affect everyone, just a small portion of people. Specifically, women who are soon to be expecting children. The Occult Museum says New Zealand's Maori warriors are part of an ancient tribe who would carve unique masks when it was time for battle. When a man died in the mask, it was believed that his soul would remain trapped in the mask they were wearing. Although their mythology does not dictate that any harm is done by the trapped souls, the presence of the masks has a strange and sometimes fatal effect on pregnant women. Women who are expecting often experience complications when they come in contact with the masks. It's unknown why this phenomenon occurs, but the museum that holds the remaining masks posts a warning that pregnant women should stay away. The literal museum is out here warning pregnant women not to come. That's how you know that this thing's seriously dangerous. Like whenever a business or enterprise does something that's actually gonna lose them money, that's when you have my attention. Considering they just lost an entire demographic of people, I'm now listening and buying into this curse. The paranormal investigators who aren't pregnant have taken a look at this, and they're having a hard time getting to the bottom of it. Some people have suggested that the Maori tribe thought that pregnant women were taboo, but that also doesn't really make any sense, because then how would they have repopulated their tribe? Regardless of why it is the way that it is, just know that if you are expecting, that's not the right time to take a look at these masks. Number 2 on this list is the Surrey ghost car. So this is a weird one and definitely something that paranormal investigators are a bit spooked by. List 25 says crashes are common on the A3 highway in England, so it looked like a routine matter when police in Surrey received calls that a car had veered off the A3 with its headlights blazing. But when officers went to investigate, they found no signs of the reported vehicle. However, a further search revealed chilling results. Just 60 feet from the reported crash scene, and buried in twisted undergrowth, was the remains of a wrecked car containing a decomposing body of a young man who, as the police estimated, had crashed there 5 months earlier. Therefore, what the witnesses reported might have been a ghostly apparition of the original car. Now, how on earth does that make any sense at all? You know what, let me answer that for you. It doesn't. First off, how did no one notice this car earlier? And then, what was that ghostly apparition that had a car veer off the road? Paranormal investigators are all scared of this one because who knows what type of effect this ghost car could have on your vehicle. And finally, number 1 on this list is the cursed mirror. This mirror isn't just cursed with a bad reflection, it's gonna show you something a lot worse than just you with a little bedhead or something. Instablog says, if you've seen Oculus, then chances are already you're scared of mirrors. And let's not even go back to the time when Bloody Mary was a whole thing. But if these creepy images of mirrors in the horror genre weren't enough, here's a real object which is most likely cursed. In St. Francisville, Louisiana, there's a plantation house which is one of the most haunted houses in America. Inside the house is this mirror, a cursed mirror. Legend goes that the plantation slave brutally killed the owner of the house, named Sarah Woodruff, and her daughters inside the house. Ever since then, they remain trapped inside the mirror. Visitors often report sights of handprints on the mirror, along with some unexplainable strange marks. And the classic haunting is also rumored, figures dressed in white, old-fashioned attire, visible on the other side of the mirror. Some people who have been exposed to this mirror for longer than they should say that these figures in white follow them around too, that they've even seen them appear in other mirrors outside of the plantation, and 1 or 2 of them have talked about how they've seen them outside of a mirror entirely, as if they were standing like right in front of them. It seems like the longer that you're exposed to this, the more of an impact the curse will have on you. Kind of like, I don't know, radiation poisoning or something like that, where the time you spend among the toxin, that's gonna hurt you more. Obviously, because of this, paranormal investigators don't want to spend too long investigating this mirror. A short stint doing some research probably won't hurt you, although it will definitely give you a scare considering you're gonna see the figures on the other side. But extended exposure is where the real danger lies with this cursed item. Number 5 on this list is the die book box. This is an evil box that tormented many people and even claimed some lives along the way. Zach Baggins writes, according to Jewish folklore, a diabook is a dark spirit that takes over the bodies of living people and uses them for evil. Legend has it that a diabook can be trapped inside of a box and prevented from causing mischief unless the box is opened, that is. Several years ago, the diabook box came up for sale on eBay. The seller listed a vintage wine cabinet that came from the estate of a woman who survived a World War II concentration camp. The seller, an antique dealer named Kevin Mannis, claimed that the first owner's granddaughter was terrified of the box, warning him that her grandmother said it held a diabook. After buying the cabinet, he was plagued by a series of unfortunate events and recurring nightmares of an old hag that would brutally attack him, causing him to wake up with bruises on his body. He also experienced an overpowering stench of cat urine in his home. Tragically, his mother suffered a stroke while opening the box. Not surprisingly, he decided to get rid of it. The box eventually ended up in the hands of Missouri Medical Museum director Jason Haxton, who was skeptical about the powers attributed to the box. He soon changed his mind. After acquiring the box, he began to experience a series of medical maladies, including bleeding eyes and strange rashes. He also began to dream of being attacked by an old hag and would also awake with bruises on his body. Kevin Mannis told me that while the box was in Haxton's basement, a man died there and his body was found lying next to the box. He eventually became so unnerved by the box that he reached out to scientists and rabbis who instructed him to build a wooden ark lined with 24 karat gold, place the box inside, and bury it in the ground. Now, this actually wasn't the end of the story for this box. The box was eventually dug up again and then later donated to a museum. This was after it had tormented a few more people, mind you, though. Now it's fully encased in a glass covering, but even that doesn't stop the evil spirit from coming after people. Many people who have visited this box have reported having serious episodes in the room while they're looking at it. Whatever spirit is trapped inside this box, it is clearly an extremely powerful one. The box remains on display at the museum, but I wouldn't recommend going to check it out if I was you. Number 4 on this list is the Devil's Rocking Chair. The Devil's Rocking Chair is actually from one of Ed and Lorraine Warren's most famous case, The Devil Made Me Do It. Zach Baggins writes, the horror began in July 1980 when David Glatzel, 11 years old, became possessed by a demon. One night he woke up screaming, claiming that he had been visited by a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hooves. David was, everyone agreed, not the kind of kid who liked scary movies or who was likely to make things up, and he was visibly shaken up by this experience. He became rather withdrawn and quiet. His older sister, Debbie, asked her fiancé, Aaron Johnson, if he would stay with her family for a while and see whether it would help David get out of his depression. Aaron, of course, agreed, but things didn't get better. David reported having more nightmares about the terrifying man who promised to take his soul. Odd scratches and bruises began to appear on the boy, and all the injuries seemed to happen while he was asleep. Odd sounds, which Aaron couldn't explain, were heard in the attic. Worst of all, David began to claim that he was now seeing the beast while he was awake. He was always seen sitting in the family's rocking chair, which the beast now claimed as his own. David was the only one who saw the beast in the chair, but family members often saw it rocking back and forth, seemingly under its own power. This was obviously a lot, so the Warrens were brought in to perform the exorcism. The exorcism took place in that rocking chair, and it's thought that the chair itself still has some evil energy from this spirit attached to it. Now the chair resides at the Haunted Museum, but owner Zach Baggins actually took the exhibit down because the chair was simply too dangerous, he thought. Number 3 on this list is the Hope Diamond. Don't get me wrong, guys, I would love to have this thing, but I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze here. Google Arts and Culture says, one of the most famous diamonds in the world, the Hope Diamond, originated in the Kolar mine in Andhra Pradesh, India. According to legend, the stone is cursed and brings misfortune to anyone who owns it. The curse is said to have come about when the original diamond was stolen from the eye of a statue. The thief met a grisly end, kick-starting a pattern of misfortune for all those who possessed the diamond. Over the years, owners of the Hope Diamond have befallen fates including death by murder, execution, they've taken their own lives, bankruptcy, and imprisonment. Thankfully, the curse seems to have been lifted when the diamond was donated to the Smithsonian in 1958. Now, I don't really buy into the fact that this curse is lifted, in my opinion. Like, literally, if you own this diamond, then you die or someone you love dies. That's what's happened throughout history. In the best possible case scenario, you just get hit with like horrible luck and lose all your money or some other horrible thing. There just really isn't any good way to spin this, this, owning the Hope Diamond is pretty much a horrible idea. Number 2 on this list is the unlucky mummy. Do not get on a boat if said boat is also carrying this mummy. Google Arts and Culture says the unlucky mummy isn't actually a mummy, but the mummy board or coffin lid of a high status woman who lived in around 950 to 900 BCE. Discovered in Thebes in the 1800s, the 4 young Englishmen who first purchased the mummy all died in unfortunate circumstances. Rumors of the curse soon spread, and in the early 20th century, journalist William Thomas Stead wrote an article on the jinxed artifact. Stead went on to be one of the passengers on the doomed Titanic. It's said that he told stories of the curse in the run-up to the disaster, with many believing that the mummy itself caused the ship's watery end. Today, the unlucky mummy is on display in the British Museum. The Titanic was supposed to be unsinkable. Enter in the unlucky mummy and boom, now the unsinkable ship goes down. Maybe it's a stretch to say that this thing caused the literal Titanic crash, but I can at least guarantee that it probably didn't help. At least this thing is now locked up in a museum very much on land and not connected to any boats that I know of. And number 1 on this list is the Hands Resist Him painting. I'm all about having some cool, groundbreaking art, but this painting definitely crosses the line. The lineup says there is no doubt the painting is disturbing. It shows a young boy standing next to a girl doll with hollow eyes and a sad, downturned mouth. The doll is holding a strange device with wires coming out of it. The eeriest part of the painting are the many disembodied children's hands reaching toward the boy through the glass panels of a door just behind him. But even more disturbing than the painting itself are the stories of what has happened to people who come in contact with it. A few years after the painting was sold, the art critic Henry Seldes died. Then the gallery owner died. Then in 1984, John Marley died. The painting disappeared, not surfacing again until 2000 in a bizarre posting on eBay. The new owners were trying to sell it because they said it was haunted. They claimed the boy and the doll in the picture would fight with each other during the night, terrifying their 4-year-old daughter. They set up a motion sensing camera in the room for 3 nights and claimed they had captured the boy in the picture leaving the frame and coming into the room, apparently fleeing in terror. The literal kid in the painting is leaving. Not freaking cool, guys. My paintings are supposed to be static and not moving, and they definitely aren't supposed to be walking around my home scaring the living bejesus out of me and my family. Apparently, this painting is locked up in a storage locker now, and no one is allowed to see it. Number 5 on this list is the Basano Vase. The Basano Vase is one of those old family heirlooms that you really don't want to get passed down to you. It started out as a wedding gift, also something that you really don't want to receive on your wedding day. Anyways, it's a pretty vase, so the couple accepted this vase, and then tragedy struck. On the night of the wedding, after the ceremony, the bride was found dead in her room. It's said that she had her hands wrapped around this vase as she was dying, and in her final breaths before passing, vowed to have her revenge. This little vow at the end muddles things because we're not sure whether it was the vow that cursed the vase or if the vase was already cursed, but whatever. Adding it to the story makes it a little bit more interesting, so she cursed the vase. Either way, at this point, nobody realized that the vase had anything to do with the death of the young bride, which is really too bad. The vase turned into a family heirloom and was passed from generation to generation. As you can imagine, it didn't go so great for those who received this. More people kept dying, all of them extremely mysteriously. Eventually, somebody caught on and decided that this vase needed to get locked up for good. For a time, it was locked up in a secret location and nobody knew where this vase was. It should have stayed that way though. The vase in 1988 saw the light of day again and was sold off to a wealthy bidder who basically just bought an extremely expensive way to die. He died very soon after receiving this vase, and thus it began all over again. The vase exchanged hands some more, killing off more and more people as it went. Finally, somebody with some proactive thinking gave it to the police. Now, nobody knows where it ended up. Whether the police destroyed it, hid it, or held onto it is anyone's guess. Number 4 on this list is the chained oak. This one is really interesting, and even though history hasn't necessarily hidden it from us, it's definitely tried to negate the consequences. Atlas Obscura says, the chained oak is an old tree wrapped in chains to prevent its branches from falling. This is due to an alleged curse put on the tree when, in 1821, the 15th Earl of Shrewsbury refused a woman's pleas for money. It's said that she then put a curse upon the nearby oak. For every branch that falls from the tree, a member of the Earl's family would die. Later that night, one of the Earl's relatives died suddenly under mysterious circumstances. Convinced that the curse was true, the Earl ordered that the branches of the oak should be chained up to prevent more from falling. I feel for that Earl's family, man. Like, literally, I'm just a grandkid of this dude, and now if this tree breaks a little bit, I'm gonna die? No thank you. At least the Earl had the sense to chain up the tree and make sure that it won't happen to harm his family. But one big storm rolls through that place and wham, now some random person is just dying. Just pray that you don't happen to be the descendant of this guy, and if you are, cross your fingers those chains were done up tight. Number 3 on this list is the baker's wedding dress. Marriage is supposed to be one of the happiest times of your life. Finding that partner you intend to spend the rest of your life with and then actually doing just that. Therefore, one of the happiest days of your life should be the day that all of this becomes official. Your wedding day. That's why it's particularly sad when tragedy or drama occurs on the day of said wedding. Just that is exactly what happened with Anna Baker. Scoop Whoop says, inside the Baker Mansion in Altoona, USA is the wedding dress of Anna Baker, who fell in love with an ironworker. Legends claim that Anna eloped from her home to get married to her lover, but her father forcibly brought her back and locked her in her bedroom. She then refused to marry anyone else and spent the rest of her life alone. After her death, the members of the Baker family reported spotting Anna's wedding dress at different places around the house. Some of them even saw the spirit of Anna Baker moving around the house dressed in that same wedding dress. Imagine literally getting forced back home and locked in your room by your father as you're getting married. It's no wonder that Anna was pissed and why this specific object has become very cursed. Now it's locked up in a case and hidden from the world in the Baker Mansion. It's a good thing that it is, because what Scoop Whoop didn't talk about is the fact that this dress can actually be dangerous. As ridiculous as it actually sounds, it has reportedly tried to strangle people in their sleep before. I know that the image of a floating wedding dress trying to suffocate somebody is kind of humorous, but I promise you that you wouldn't be laughing if it happened to you. I like that this thing is locked up, but would be far more comfortable if we just threw it in the fire and we're done with it completely. Number 2 on this list is the Anguished Man painting. The Anguished Man painting is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, a painting of a man in some very clear anguish. The thing is that this man doesn't really look all that human. He hardly has any facial features at all and almost looks a bit like a burn victim. Also, where his eyeballs should be, there's just these 2 gaping holes, and his mouth also looks like one giant hole with no end. Even without the haunting associated with this picture, it's already pretty scary, and I personally have no idea why anyone would want it in their home. That's exactly what Sean Robinson did though, and he quickly suffered the consequences. Scoop Whoop says, fascinated by the charm of the Anguished Man painting, Sean Robinson inherited the painting from his grandmother and decided to hang the painting on the wall of his house. Soon after that, Sean and his family started experiencing paranormal events like cracking of the doors in the middle of the night and sudden blood-curdling screams from nowhere. Sean's wife decided to investigate the origin of the painting and found that the artist who painted the painting killed himself, and before doing that, he mixed his own blood with the paint that he used in making the painting. Learning this, the couple decided to hide the painting in the basement of their house in Cumbria. So, the first thing about this story that is kind of questionable is how anybody could be fascinated by the charm of this thing. It's gross, and I don't like looking at it, let alone having it hanging in my home. The second thing that's super questionable is why we decided to hide it. I swear, none of these people have ever heard of fire before, guys. Like, great, thank you for hiding it from the world, this is helpful, but what would be even more helpful is if we just took a match and burned it so nobody ever has to deal with it again. I apologize to the artist who painted this thing, but if you're gonna use your own blood and make a haunted painting, then come on, man, kinda deserves to be burned. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Thomas Busby chair. This chair is freaking deadly, man, and even though it's pretty much safe from public use now, I still hate that it exists. Scoop Whoop says, popularly known as Busby's stoop chair, this wooden furniture is cursed by the spirit of Thomas Busby, who was known to ruthlessly murder people. Before getting hanged for his crimes, he requested to have a meal in his favorite local pub. Upon finishing his meal, he stood and said, "May sudden death come to anyone who dares sit on my chair." And ever since then, 63 people who dared to sit on the chair met untimely and terrifying deaths. Later, the owner of the pub donated the chair to the Thirsk Museum UK, and it's still there, hung 1.5 meters off the ground to prevent any further deaths. Can you imagine owning that pub and being like, "Oh, no worries, 60 people have died in this chair, all is good"? Like, how the heck did we allow 63 separate people to sit in this chair and die? And, okay, like, I'm happy that it's hanging 1.5 meters off the ground and nobody can sit in it, but guys, come on. This is literally a dangerous weapon that we have right here. The fact that this thing hasn't been totally dismantled is kind of ridiculous. What happens if somebody steals this chair and then decides, you know what, I'm gonna murder people with it without anybody finding out? Frankly, I think history should have hidden this thing a little bit better. Hopefully we don't hear any more murderous stories about it from here on out.
Coming in at 5, Abandoned Tunnel, Rochester, New York. The Rochester Industrial Rapid Transit Railway, more commonly known as the Rochester Subway, was a light rail rapid transit line in the city of Rochester, New York from 1927 to 1956. This subway was constructed in the bed of the old Erie Canal, which allowed the route to be grade separated for its entire length. The subway was designed to reduce interurban traffic on city streets and to facilitate freight interchange between the railroads. However, the final day of passenger service was on June 30th, 1956. Now, saying that, have you ever stopped to wonder what an abandoned subway tunnel would look like? Well, thanks to some urban explorers, we now know. This picture was taken by a group exploring the dark tunnels in Rochester, New York, and it gives a pretty disturbing idea about what might be down there. All we can see is the dark, bleak walls and some kind of hazmat suit hanging from the ceiling. Very chilling indeed. Coming in at number 4, Abandoned Doll Factory, Spain. I don't know about you, but I don't think many people would jump at the opportunity to explore an abandoned doll factory. A dark, derelict building with hundreds of molds and casts stacked against the barren walls, over tables and on shelves. However, thanks to one brave urban explorer, they explored the dark halls of this Spanish doll factory in Valencia. According to the photographs taken, the now deserted factory is spread out over 3 stories, with a large staircase running up the main tower. It is a creepy building with even creepier pictures. One man even took the time to warn potential visitors not to go there, citing his fears about a potential curse. I quote, "Do not enter the factory. Seriously, I took a doll's head and a box and I had to return it. Now that sight gives me a strong anxiety. There have been rituals." Now the picture itself shows a row of dolls' heads which were known as bisque dolls. They were at the peak of their popularity between 1860 and 1990 and were intended as fashion items, created to represent women and adorned with wigs made from mohair or human hair. The picture is absolutely terrifying, with some of the dolls having a blank stare while others seem as though they are frowning. Regardless of the expression, these dolls are absolutely terrifying. Coming in at number 3, Purple Garment, Belitz-Hillstatten Hospital. Built in 1898, Belitz-Hillstatten Hospital is a now disused hospital complex of approximately 60 buildings located in the district of Belitz-Hillstatten. Between the years of 1898 and 1930, the complex served as a sanatorium for lung diseases, generally housing those with then fatal conditions. During World War I, it served as a field hospital that treated the earliest casualties of new weapons such as machine guns and mustard gas. During this time, it also treated a young soldier named Adolf Hitler, who had been blinded by a British gas attack and wounded in the leg at the Battle of Somme. During World War II, the hospital went on to be used as a Nazi field hospital, treating injured soldiers. Occupied by the Russians in 1945, it served as a Soviet military hospital for the next 50 years until 1995. The complex is now derelict and is the perfect stomping ground for urban explorers, as you would expect. This is just one of many creepy pictures taken in the abandoned hospital. We don't know who the purple garment belonged to, but seeing it strung up with shoes placed under it makes it incredibly unnerving. I think I would rather not know the backstory behind this picture. Coming in at number 2, Fire Extinguishers, West Park Hospital. West Park Hospital, sometimes referred to as West Park Asylum, was a large psychiatric hospital in Epsom, Surrey. The hospital seems to have been so called because of its location to the west of the landscaped parkland formerly associated with Horton Manor. Now, although it is sometimes referred to as an asylum by urban explorers and the media, West Park was never officially termed as such, having opened as West Park Mental Hospital in 1923. During operation, the hospital catered for around 2,000 patients of mixed class. However, it was slowly run down from the mid-1990s, and by 2003, most of the hospital was closed and derelict, although some buildings, including the New Epsom and Ewell Cottage Hospital, remain in use by NHS healthcare services. Due to its derelict state, it came to be of interest to urban explorers who were drawn in by its sheer size and also the many hospital items still inside, such as beds, kitchen equipment, as well as personal items. Now, this picture from the attic of the hospital is sure to send chills down your spine. Discovered by an urban explorer, they reportedly found these fire extinguishers arranged in a pentagram form. Sure makes you wonder what was really going on in the hospital. However, in November 2010, demolition began on the former hospital buildings. As of April 2011, most of the central buildings had been cleared, with only limited number of wards, the water tower and administration building being retained for conversion to apartments. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Dolls, Chernobyl. As most will know, thanks to the popular HBO series Chernobyl, the Chernobyl disaster was a nuclear accident that happened on April 26th, 1986 at the number 4 nuclear reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat in the north of Ukraine, SSR. It is considered to be the worst nuclear disaster in history and is one of only 2 nuclear energy disasters rated at 7, the maximum severity. The accident began during a safety test on the RBMK type nuclear reactor, which was commonly used throughout the Soviet Union. The test, however, failed and a large amount of energy was released, vaporizing superheated cooling water and rupturing the reactor core in a highly destructive steam explosion. In the accident's aftermath, 237 people suffered from acute radiation sickness, of whom 31 died within the first 3 months. To this day, Pripyat lies abandoned, with the Chernobyl facility haunting its landscape. The city had many abandoned kindergartens, such as the Zolotozh Kluchik or Golden Key. Now, the thought of a kindergarten so close to a nuclear disaster site is absolutely heartbreaking. The idea of small, innocent children being exposed to radiation which will likely kill them is devastating. However, what is absolutely soul-crushing and at the same time chilling is this photo of a plastic doll with grey hair completely naked except for a gas mask. It appears to be splayed out among the remains of a rusty bed abandoned like the rest of the city, slowly taken a hold by nature. The entire thing sends chills down my spine.
Number 5. Thomas Busby's chair. Our first entry actually is in a museum, but the curators have deemed it so haunted and dangerous that they have been forced to take special measures to ensure it doesn't unleash its curse on the museum's patrons. The story begins in North Yorkshire in 1702, when 2 criminals, Daniel Audie and his son-in-law, Thomas Busby, came into conflict. They were coin forgers who essentially ran a criminal empire, but Daniel disapproved of Tom's relationship with his daughter. This resulted in a fight, which ended with Daniel's untimely demise. Thomas was arrested soon afterwards and sentenced to be hung. There is some variation in what happened next. Some versions of the tale say that Thomas was arrested at his favorite pub, and others say he was allowed back into the bar for his last meal before his death. Whatever the case, before being taken away, he told the other patrons of the pub, "May sudden death come to anyone who dare sit in my chair." He was then taken away and hung across the street. As the local historian and poet William Grange described it, the bones of the poor wretch who had committed murder were hung to fester in the sunshine and blow in the tempest, until they fell piecemeal to earth, and tradition yet tells tales of night wanderers being terrified when passing this dreaded spot. While Thomas began apparently haunting the spot across from the inn where his remains were displayed, the curse he laid on the chair began taking effect. Over the years, many brave souls sat on the chair to prove that they were not afraid and paid the price. In 1894, a chimney sweep sat in the chair and was found the next day hanging next to where Busby had been displayed. In 1967, 2 Air Force pilots sat in the chair as a joke, but when they were driving home that night, they crashed into a tree and did not survive. A few years later, a builder sat in the chair and fell off of a roof later that same night. Not long after, a cleaner fell into the chair after slipping while mopping the floor and died of a brain tumor soon afterwards. In 1978, the owner of the now renamed Busby Stoop Inn decided that too many deaths had occurred and donated the chair to the Thirsk Museum. Although they didn't technically lock the chair away, they did hang the chair on a wall, 5 feet off of the ground, to prevent anyone from sitting on it and receiving Busby's fatal curse. Number 4. The Hanging Man Painting. This haunted painting is actually linked to a haunted photograph, making it twice as haunted as most objects on this list. It all started when a photographer named James Kidd took a seemingly innocuous photo of a wooden cart next to a barn. Kidd thought nothing of it until he had the photo developed and saw that a ghostly figure had made its way into the frame. On the left side of the cart, he could see a headless and hanging man. He showed the photos to others who searched for any sign of doctoring, but could find none. It was then that this photo caught the attention of a painter named Laura P. Laura claims that she felt drawn to the image and decided that she had to make an oil painting based on the photograph. While painting the picture, she reported feeling deeply uneasy, but pushed through to finish her art. The painting was hung at a local business, but was soon taken down after it reportedly began moving on its own and caused several important papers to go missing. Laura then put the painting up in her own home, but soon began to experience strange occurrences. These included objects being knocked over or broken, mysterious knocking on the doors, strange leaks, and perhaps most disturbing, the apparition of the headless man in her home. Once word of the haunted painting got out, she received several offers from collectors to buy the painting, but she has so far refused, claiming that she is afraid of what the painting could do in the homes of others. Number 3. The Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript is a coded book that was believed to have been written at some point in the early 15th century. It was discovered in a locked chest in Rome in the year 1912, and deciphering its history, and more importantly its meaning, has been the goal of several different scholars for many years before and since. Its first known owner was believed to be Rudolph II. Rudolph apparently thought that the mysterious book had been written by Roger Bacon, and purchased the book for a huge sum of money, roughly 600 ducats of gold. The first 100% confirmed owner of the text was an alchemist named George Barish, who found the mysterious book in his personal library, unsure of its origin. It was passed from him to a variety of scholars, emperors, and officials, all of whom failed to decipher its bizarre text and illustrations. Several of the world's best cryptographers from the First and Second World War have tried to decipher its 240 pages, and have not found any way to read the book. Some of the pictures include detailed sketches of plants that are not found in nature and zodiac signs. As you might expect, there are several theories about the purpose and author of this book, with some believing that it was a herbology text written in a lost shorthand, and others having more outlandish theories that it was created by aliens from another world. One theory is that the book was written by either a demon or the devil himself, and that anyone who manages to translate its contents will unleash a curse upon the world. A theory they believe is bolstered by the fact that several people who have attempted a translation have gone on to suffer several years of bad fortune. Whether the origin of this book is human or demonic in nature, it is still the most mysterious and curiosity-inducing books in human history. Number 2. The Anguished Man. The tale of this rather disturbing-looking painting is strange and steeped in mystery, but every scant piece of information we have on it is more unsettling than the last. The painting of a featureless man who seems to be screaming was apparently painted by a deeply troubled artist who mixed his own blood with his paints in an effort to get the right shade of red. Not long after completing it, the artist took his own life, and the painting found its way into a woman's care. She kept it for many years, but claimed that once she put the painting up, her and her family began to see a dark, shadowy figure roaming about her house. At night, they would hear strange sounds like footsteps and crying. The woman took the painting down and kept it in her attic for 25 years until she died, leaving the painting to its current caretaker, Sean Robinson. Sean had been warned by his grandmother that the painting was haunted, but he thought little of it. Robinson kept the painting in his basement for about a decade, before rediscovering it and putting it up. Once again, the family began seeing the dark, shadowy figure roaming the halls and hearing the sound of weeping and moaning during the night. Sean began leaving a camera on by the painting to try and get evidence of its paranormal nature, and upon reviewing the footage, heard some odd noises and saw evidence of doors opening and closing, seemingly by themselves, and the painting falling over onto the ground. As time went on, the activity became more and more intense, with his wife seeing a strange mist and an unseen force pushing his son down the stairs. Things went from bad to worse when guests who came to see the painting began reporting intense and sudden nosebleeds. Sean takes the painting out from time to time to show it to paranormal investigators in television programs who want to hear his story. But otherwise, the anguished man is apparently kept locked away in a safe location to prevent any further harm from coming to unwitting people. Number 1. The Basano Vase. Although it has fallen out of favor now, for centuries, a common gift given to brides on the day of their weddings were intricate, ornate vases. Our next tale begins in the 15th century in Italy and spans over 500 years. Legend says that on the day of her wedding, a bride in a village near Napoli found a gift, with no clue which of the guests had given it to her. It was a 4-pound silver vase. She decided to put it in her room for safekeeping before the wedding ceremony. But when the ceremony was due to start, the bride was nowhere to be found. The groom went to her room to look for her, and found her lifeless body on the ground, with no trace of what had caused the death, other than her desperately clutching the silver vase. The bride was buried, and the vase was passed on to one of her family members to be taken care of. Within days, the second member of the family was dead from unknown causes. The vase was given to another member of the family, and when he also passed away, the family made the connection between all the recent tragedies and the Basano vase. Unsure of what to do, they reached out to a local priest, who upon hearing the story, informed them that whoever had given it to the bride had either cursed it or made it from cursed materials. He advised them to bury it on sacred ground. They dug a hole and wrote a note, warning, "Beware, this vase brings death," which they placed in the cursed vase. The vase was buried and remained underground for the next 500 years. By horrible chance, a man in 1988 was digging and came across the vase. He read the note, but being the skeptical type, discarded it and took the newly found Basano vase to a local auction house. The vase went up for auction and was sold for the equivalent of $2,270 to a local pharmacist. Within 3 months, the pharmacist was dead, and the vase was sold by his family to a local doctor, who also passed away soon after. The vase developed a reputation after this, and several people who were approached to purchase it refused. But it was eventually bought by an archaeologist who, despite his family's protests, did not believe in curses. He died 3 months later. His family threw the vase out their window, but a police officer who was passing by saw this and tried to return it. The family refused the vase back and told him of its cursed nature. He tried to give it to multiple different museums, but having heard about the curse, they all refused. Fearing for his life, he did what the bride's family had done over 500 years prior and buried it in a lead box in a cemetery. Which cemetery he used is unknown, but let us hope that no unwitting soul rediscovers this cursed vase and unleashes it upon humanity once again. Number 5. The Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript is a coded book that was believed to have been written at some point in the early 15th century. It was discovered in a locked chest in Rome in the year 1912, and deciphering its history, and more importantly, its meaning, has been a goal of several different scholars for many years before and since. Its first known owner was believed to be Rudolph II. Rudolph apparently thought that the mysterious book had been written by Roger Bacon, and purchased the book for a huge amount of money, roughly 600 ducats of gold. The first 100% confirmed owner of the text was an alchemist named George Barish, who found the mysterious book in his personal library, unsure of its origin. It was passed from him to a variety of scholars, emperors, and officials, all of whom failed to decipher its bizarre text and illustrations. Several of the world's best cryptographers from the First and Second World War have tried to decipher its 240 pages and have not found any way to read the book. Some of the pictures include detailed sketches of plants that are not found in nature, zodiac signs. As you might expect, there are several theories about the purpose and the author of this book, with some believing that it was a herbology text written in a lost shorthand, and others having more outlandish theories that it was created by aliens from another world. One theory is that the book was written by either a demon or the devil himself, and that anyone who manages to translate its contents will unleash a curse upon the world. A theory they believe is bolstered by the fact that several people who have attempted a translation have gone on to suffer several years of bad fortune. Whether the origin of this book is human or demonic in nature, it is still the most mysterious and curiosity-inducing book in human history. Number 4. The Hanging Man Painting. This haunted painting is actually linked to a haunted photograph, making it twice as haunted as most of the items on this list. It all started when a photographer named James Kidd took a seemingly innocuous photo of a wooden cart next to a barn. Kidd thought nothing of it until he had the photo developed and saw a ghostly figure had made its way into the frame. On the left side of the cart, he could see a headless and hanging man. He showed the photos to others who searched for any sign of doctoring, but they could find none. It was then that this photo caught the attention of a painter named Laura P. Laura claims that she felt drawn to the image and decided that she had to make an oil painting based off of the photograph. While painting the picture, she reported feeling deeply uneasy, but she pushed through to finish her art. The painting was hung at a local business, but was soon taken down after it reportedly began moving on its own and caused several important papers to go missing. Laura then put the painting up in her own home, but soon began to experience strange occurrences. These included objects being knocked over or broken, mysterious knocking on the doors, strange leaks, and perhaps most disturbing, the apparition of the headless man in her home. Once word of the haunted painting got out, she received several offers from collectors to buy the painting, but she has so far refused, claiming that she is afraid of what the painting could do in the homes of others. Number 3. Thomas Busby's Chair. Our next entry takes us to North Yorkshire in 1702, when two criminals, Daniel Audie and his son-in-law, Thomas Busby, came into conflict. They were coin forgers who essentially ran a criminal empire, but Daniel disapproved of Tom's relationship with his daughter. This resulted in a fight, which ended with Daniel's untimely demise. Thomas was arrested soon afterwards and sentenced to be hanged. There is some variation in what happens next. Some versions of the tale say that Thomas was arrested at his favorite pub, and others say he was allowed back into the bar for his last meal before his death. Whatever the case, before being taken away, he told the other patrons of the pub, "May sudden death come to anyone who dare sit in my chair." He was then taken away and hung across the street. As the local historian and poet William Grange described it, the bones of the poor wretch who had committed murder were hung to fester in the sunshine and blow in the tempest until they fell piecemeal to the earth, and tradition yet tells tales of night wanderers being terrified when passing this dreaded spot. While Thomas began apparently haunting the spot across from the inn where his remains were displayed, the curse he laid on the chair began taking effect. Over the years, many brave souls sat on the chair to prove that they were not afraid, and they paid the price. In 1894, a chimney sweep sat in the chair and was found the next day hanging next to where Busby had been displayed. In 1967, two Air Force pilots sat in the chair as a joke, but when they were driving home that night, they crashed into a tree and they did not survive. A few years later, a builder sat in the chair and fell off of a roof later that same night. Not long after, a cleaner fell into the chair after slipping while mopping the floor and died of a brain tumor soon after. In 1978, the owner of the now renamed Busby Stoop Inn decided that too many deaths had occurred and donated the chair to the Thirsk Museum. Although they didn't technically lock the chair away, they did hang the chair on the wall, 5 feet off of the ground, to prevent anyone from sitting on it and receiving Busby's fatal curse. Number 2. The Basano Vase. Although it has fallen out of favor now, for centuries a common gift given to brides on the day of their wedding was an intricate ornate vase. Our next tale begins in 15th century Italy and spans over 500 years. Legend says that on the day of her wedding, a bride in a village near Napoli found a gift with no clue which of the guests had given it to her. It was a 4-pound silver vase. She decided to put it in her room for safekeeping before the wedding ceremony, but when the ceremony was due to start, the bride was nowhere to be found. The groom went to her room to look for her and found her lifeless body on the ground, with no trace of what had caused the death other than her desperately clutching the silver vase. The bride was buried, and the vase was passed on to one of her family members to be taken care of. Within days, the second member of the family was dead from unknown causes. The vase was given to another member of the family, and when he also passed away, the family made the connection between all the recent tragedies and the Basano Vase. Unsure what to do, they reached out to a local priest, who upon hearing the story informed them that whoever had given it to the bride had either cursed it or made it from cursed materials. He advised them to bury it on sacred ground. They dug a hole and wrote a note warning, "Beware. This vase brings death," which they placed inside the cursed vase. The vase was buried and remained underground for the next 500 years. By horrible chance, a man in 1988 was digging and came across the vase. He read the note, but being the skeptical type, discarded it and took the newly found Basano vase to a local auction house. The vase went up for auction and was sold for the equivalent of $2,270 to a local pharmacist. Within 3 months, the pharmacist was dead, and the vase was sold by his family to a local doctor who also passed away soon after. The vase developed a reputation after this, and several people who were approached to purchase it refused. But it was eventually bought by an archaeologist who, despite his family's protests, did not believe in curses. He died 3 months later. His family threw the vase out their window, but a police officer who was passing by saw this and tried to return it. The family refused the vase back and told him of its cursed nature. He tried to give it to multiple different museums, but having heard about the curse, they all refused. Fearing for his life, he did what the bride's family had done over 500 years prior, and buried it in a lead box in the cemetery. Which cemetery he used is unknown, but let us hope that no unwitting soul rediscovers this cursed vase and unleashes it upon humanity once more. Number 1. Robert, the Evil Doll. We've all heard of the cursed Annabelle doll that has permeated pop culture for the last decade, but have you heard of Robert? Robert was a gift to a young boy of the same name, Robert Eugene Otto, from his grandfather. The grandfather had been traveling in Germany and came across the doll, who was not intended to be a toy, but a window display. He bought the doll for his grandson, who dressed it in a sailor's outfit that he had outgrown, and kept it with him at almost all times. As the young boy grew up, witnesses remember his relationship with the doll seemed to grow more and more unhealthy, with him referring to the doll as a living person, and blaming mishaps on him. The boy, who went by his middle name Gene, grew up to be an eccentric artist in a stately home known as the Artist House. He kept Robert by the upstairs window, where children claimed to see him moving in and out of view. When Gene died in 1974, the new owner of the house, Myrtle Reuter, found the doll and became its new owner. Visitors of the house began reporting the sound of giggling and footsteps coming from the attic, where the doll was being kept. When the doll was around people who spoke ill of its original owner, some claimed that his facial expression seemed to change. After Myrtle got sick of the doll apparently moving around the home by himself and scaring guests for 20 years, she chose to donate Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. Robert now resides in a locked display case to prevent the over 120-year-old doll from decaying further, but also to protect the visitors of the museum. But even those precautions don't always seem to work. Guests who insult Robert at the museum report experiencing tragedy in their lives not long after. This has ranged from people losing their jobs, getting divorced, breaking bones, getting into automobile accidents, and even a few deaths. Number 5. Gacy's Clown Paintings. John Wayne Gacy was the notorious serial killer operating out of Chicago from the late 60s until the late 70s. He would lure victims into his home with the promise of illicit substances. He would then trick the young men into putting on a pair of handcuffs, claiming that he was going to demonstrate a magic trick. He would then force himself on them, them, and finally asphyxiate them before hiding their remains in his crawl space. In the 11 years that he operated, he was responsible for the deaths of over 33 people before he was arrested on December 21st, 1978, and sentenced to execution by lethal injection. Gacy had appeared for years to be the perfect family man, being an active member of his community, and in a detail that the media became obsessed with, volunteering as a clown who would perform at parades, fundraisers, and children's hospitals. This was unrelated to his crimes, but was such an odd detail that the press dubbed him the Killer Clown. This apparently served as the inspiration for Stephen King's It, and since then, clowns just haven't been able to catch a break. While awaiting his fate on death row, Gacy took up painting, creating self-portraits featuring himself dressed as Pogo the Clown. He is believed to have created over 2,000 paintings in prison before his death in 1994. After this, his attorney auctioned the paintings paintings off, with several of them being purchased and burned in a bonfire attended by the families of the victims. Of course, this just made the paintings that remained more valuable and rare, and they have been known to show up in auctions where they are purchased for tens of thousands of dollars by people with questionable morals and taste. Speaking of which, Zak Bagans purchased a few of Gacy's paintings and put them on display in his museum in a display case dedicated to the memorabilia related to the killer clown. However, despite his best efforts, he was unable to purchase Gacy's brain to add it to the exhibit. Number 4. Peggy the Doll. A staple item in any museum focusing on ghosts and murder is a classic haunted doll. Robert the Doll is a classic, and the whole world has learned about Annabelle at this point. But Zak has a doll on display which he claims puts them all to shame, and her name is Peggy. Peggy's story begins in 2015 when a paranormal investigator named Jane Harris received a call from a distraught woman who claimed to have purchased a doll at a garage sale that was causing her to suffer from a mystery illness and vivid nightmares. The woman locked the doll in her shed until Harris agreed to take the doll away with her. A couple days later, she became sick and unable to get out of bed. She started hearing strange noises and hallucinated while the doll was in the house. Peggy was examined by psychics who claimed that she was possessed by the spirit of a woman born in 1946 who had died of a respiratory illness and attached herself to the doll. Harris uploaded a video of the doll online, and almost 100 viewers claimed to have become briefly ill after seeing the video. Zak soon purchased the doll, putting it on display in his museum where guests are asked to sign a waiver before seeing it, absolving him from any liability should the guests experience horrible paranormal activity due to exposure to Peggy. Number 3. The Manson blood painting. Charles Manson was the infamous cult leader who formed a group of mostly young women, teaching them that they were the reincarnations of the original Christians and that he was Jesus Christ. Manson began using his followers for extortion, taking a music teacher who they believed had inherited a large fortune hostage in his home and demanding that he join the cult and turn over the money. The man maintained that they were mistaken, and Manson attacked him with a sword before having one of his followers finish the job. In the cult's most famous incident, Manson sent 4 family members to the home of Hollywood actress Sharon Tate with instructions for them to end the lives of Tate and the 4 guests who were staying with her. The next night, these family members were joined by 3 others and brought by Manson to the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, where they broke in and tied up the 2 residents at Manson's instructions. He then ordered them to dispatch the victims and left. Although it hasn't been conclusively proven, the Manson family are believed to be responsible for at least 15 other deaths, with Manson himself claiming at one point that he was responsible for 35 total deaths. Manson was apprehended and remained in prison until his death in 2017. Even while in custody, he maintained a dedicated group of admirers, and after his death, his ashes were scattered at his funeral and an admiring artist gathered some of them up. The artist then used their own blood in order to paint a picture of the cult leader, using Manson's real ashes to fill in the eyes on the portrait. Zak Bagans purchased the painting and put it on display at his museum. When asked how he was sure that the ashes were authentic, he responded, "My people were there at the funeral, and my people saw what went down." Because of course they were. Number 2. The Devil's Rocking Chair. In 1981, a young boy in Brookfield, Connecticut named David Glatzel began having vivid night terrors. As time went on, these nightmares began infiltrating his everyday life, with him seeing haunting figures such as an old man with a white beard and a man with big black eyes and animalistic features and jagged teeth who would sit in an old rocking chair and watch the boy. He then began engaging in bizarre behavior like kicking, biting, seizures, and marks of strangulation appearing on him out of nowhere. His family reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they concluded that David was possessed by a demon. Priests performed 3 exorcisms on David, which supposedly caused him to levitate. In the chaos, the boyfriend of Debbie, David's older sister, Arnie Johnson, confronted the demon and told it to leave the child alone and to take him instead. David made a full recovery, but the demon decided to take Arnie up on his offer. A few months later, Arnie stabbed his landlord to death, and upon apprehension claimed that the devil made him do it. His trial marked the first time in history that someone entered a plea of not guilty for reasons of demonic possession, although this plea was rejected. This story was loosely adapted into the third Conjuring film, which follows Ed and Lorraine Warren's involvement with the case. Lorraine Warren also claimed to have seen beasts sitting in the rocking chair, and not long after her death, Zach purchased the chair and put it on display. He released footage of the chair moving by itself and claims that the first night it was on display, guests began having vivid visions and passing out in front of the chair, and causing 5 of his tour guides to burst into tears. Bagan had to close the exhibit for a while, but the chair is back on display for guests to be terrified by. Number 1. Ed Gein's Cauldron. Ed Gein was a serial in Plainsfield, Wisconsin, living on the family property he had inherited until his crimes were discovered, the details of which captivated America due to their cruelty, violence, and disgustingness. Gein grew up with a brother, a frequently drunk father, and an overbearing religious fanatic of a mother. She was cruel and puritanical, constantly going on about the dangers of sin, carnal desire, and mocking and shaming her children, who rarely left the home for anything other than school. The family lived together until Ed's father died when Ed was 34. 4 years later, while burning brush with Ed, his brother Henry got caught in a blaze and died, leaving Ed alone with his mother. He took care of his mother, never dating or going out with friends, in order to appease her until she passed away, driving Ed off the deep end. People in Plainfield started going missing, with suspicion eventually leading the police to Gein's home. They discovered a variety of horrible sights, like a skin lampshade, skull soup bowls, and various masks and items of clothing that Gein had constructed from his victims, as well as bodies that he had stolen from the local cemetery. A couple months later, Gein's property was sold at auction, where a woman purchased an old cauldron, thinking that it would make a good planter for her flowers. Years later, the woman's granddaughter was talking with one of Gein's old neighbors who had been assisting the police with cleanup on the farm. He immediately recognized the cauldron as being the one he had seen years before, covered in dried blood and next to a vat of entrails. Ed Gein was of course the inspiration for classic horror movie characters like Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill, but his real-life cauldron was put up for sale in an Ed Gein auction in 2015, where it was purchased by Zach Bagans, who put it on display at his museum.
Number 5. The Sword of Daneslef. The Sword of Daneslef, and hey, there's a good chance I'm pronouncing that wrong, so let me know, is among the most famous of weapons in Nordic myths, a legendary cursed sword of yore. Daneslef was the blade of King Hogni, who was a noble king in ancient Viking stories. The Daneslef sword was handcrafted by the dwarf Dane, who is said to be among the most skilled craftsmen in all of the realms. The name of the sword literally translates to Dane's legacy. However, the sword had been imbued with a dark, powerful magic energy. Whenever the mighty Daneslef was drawn, it could not be sheathed until blood had coated its blade. Someone had to die to feed the thirst of blood that quelled inside the tempered steel. Not just that too, but this cursed sword must have had like a very specific hunger pang for neck blood, as the sword had to behead an enemy. Sounds like an extremely high maintenance cursed sword. Surely all blood tastes the same, right? To a sword? I don't know, maybe I'm being dismissive. The sword features prominently in the story of Prose Edda, an ancient Nordic textbook thought to date back from the 12th century, which told the story of King Hogni and his beautiful daughter Hild, while he warred in the eternal battle of the kings. According to this old story, Hogni came to meet other kings across the land, and brought his daughter to introduce them. However, a jealous rival king seized his daughter and stole her away. Hogni gathered as many of his most fearsome warriors as he could to reclaim her, and sailed west in pursuit of his daughter. He found her on an island, yet her captor had attempted to persuade Hogni into making peace with him. But Hogni told him it was too late to end that. I mean, makes sense, you stole my daughter, bro. But the Daneslef had been drawn, and it couldn't be sheathed until he'd been beheaded. The legend then goes on to state that the two men fought for 143 years. But I'm hoping they took like 2 15-minute breaks a day at least. And my ghouls and goblins, if you love the scares we put out for you, the nicest way to show thanks is to toss a little like and subscribe our way. If you're already subscribed, you're the coolest. If you're not, Well, I still like you lots, but you could really win me over with a like and subscribe. Just saying, if you wanted to get on my good side. Number 4. Runes of power. To the Vikings, runes and runic magic were a cornerstone of their culture. Runes were their language, after all, their written language. The old poem Havamal explains that Odin, the Allfather, discovered the runes when he hung himself from the world tree, Yggdrasil, in order to attain enlightenment. As he hung on the tree, blowing for 9 nights and 9 days, he found himself slowly fading away, ready to be taken away to hell, when as he was about to die, he found the runes, took them, and earned his life and bestowed them to humanity. Carving a rune into an object imbued it with a great deal of power. With the right inscriptions and the aid of a powerful seeress or sorceress, you could predict the future, protect yourself or your family from misfortune. You could even imbue a blade with powerful energy. Skyrim got that right exactly. As well, runes were said to be the key to activating conjurations, curses, and spells, but as well, runic inspirations were found to bless just everyday things. Oftentimes, they told stories within them too. Runestones were also used in Viking culture as landmarks, and the inscriptions they bore contained powerful magic within them. Take the Glavendrup stone, which contains a powerful warning to anyone who dares to move it. Listen to what it says. Ragnhildr placed this stone in memory of Ali the Pale, priest of the sanctuary, honorable thane of the retinue. Ali's sons made the monument in memory of their father, and his wife in memory of her husband, and Soti carved these runes in memory of his lord. Thor, hallow these runes. A warlock be he who damages this stone, drags it in memory of another. So this runestone's got a little curse put in place to make sure no one disturbs the slumber of Ali the Pale. Perhaps one of the most famous runestones in the world is the Björktorp runestone in Sweden. A mysterious runestone whose purpose is not fully known, but bears another frightening inscription. Listen to this one, and I gotta put a bit of a voice on for this one, you'll understand. I, master of the runes, conceal here runes of power. Incessantly plagued by maleficence, doomed to insidious death is he who breaks this monument. Do forgive me, but can you imagine me just reading that normal? Would not have worked. So we might not know what the Björktorp runestone is for, but we can say with certainty no one is willing to move it to find out what might be built on top of it, just in case runic magic is real and they don't want to experiment with dooming themselves to an insidious death plagued by malfeasance. That sounds terrible. Number 3, the Nidaros Cathedral. The Nidaros Cathedral is a popular tourist hotspot in Norway. Renowned for its beautiful architecture, it's a stunning monument to Norway's very rich history, and it's also quite known as one of the more haunted buildings in the entire country. It's located in the city center of Trondheim, named after the Trondheim Nidaros, which was the capital of Norway during the era of Vikings. In the early days, it was a humble, simple wooden chapel built to serve as the tomb of Saint Olaf, a Viking king who helped introduce Christianity to Viking culture and would be remembered as the patron saint of Norway. It was the traditional location for the consecration of new kings of Norway. Now, if you're looking at this and you think, wow, what a building, that's because it took 230 years to build it, so I would hope it looks great. From the years 1070 to 1300, it was worked on round the clock. Now let's get into the most important part, and the only part we even care about this building is the ghost. I just spent so much time talking about architectural history when we could be talking about a ghost. Norway's most famous ghost is known as the monk, and he's an apparition that manifests as a medieval monk with a bloody gash along its throat, dripping onto the floor. The monk's first sighting was in 1924, and since then has become a bit of a staple of the cathedral, with countless sightings and tourists reporting hearing, seeing, or feeling the monk around the cathedral. The first sighting was from a bishop's wife during service, and she claims that she saw the monk standing behind the congregation with bright glowing blue eyes. She said his face was sharp and glowing, and when he raised his hand, that blood started to pour from his throat. The priest who was tending to the service at the time claims that while he was speaking, he felt an unspeakable pain in his throat, as if something was lodged in it. Number 2, Viking graves. Now, the Vikings were a very superstitious people. Ghosts were a very common belief and possible threat in medieval Norway. Your soul could go just about all over. You might end up in Valhall, the realm of Odin, where you can drink and fight to your heart's content for eternity, or you could end up in Folkvanger, Freya's realm, a lush, bountiful field that sprawled forever, or you could end up in Helheim, which was just a terrible, cold, dismal place. Imagine spending your entire life in freezing Scandinavia, dying, and then waking up in a different freezing afterlife. I would be so upset. Of course, if you didn't qualify for any of these afterlife options, you could always end up with your soul trapped on the earth and reanimated as a ghost or a corpse zombie monster called a Draugr, which anyone who spent too much time inside of any of Skyrim's caves can can tell you are a real nuisance. So Vikings had to come up with all sorts of ways to make sure that nobody came back to cause any problems for the village. No doubt you've heard of Viking funerary ships or their pyres, where their dead were sent off into the water in a longboat with possessions that might befit them in the afterlife, and then lit ablaze with an arrow. But oftentimes, that was more for higher caste members of society. Other burials were traditional, but the body was kept in the home for a few days to prepare. The Vikings took all sorts of fun precautions to make sure they wouldn't have a draugr on their hands. The head was wrapped in bandages. Oftentimes the feet would be bound or sewn together, or even needles would be placed into the feet to make sure just in case they came back to life they wouldn't be able to walk. Corpses were brought into houses feet first because they believed the spirit of the person would not be able to see where they were being taken for burial and thus unable to find their way back home. If they had the time too, Vikings would build something really fun called a corpse door, an opening they built into a home which was bricked up, and when the burial was ready would be smashed through and the dead would be carried through this feet first. The belief was that the reanimated could only enter their home from the way they had left, so if there was no corpse door anymore, the draugr wouldn't be able to get in and it would just sort of paw at the door like a sad cat. Honestly, the logic is there. This one makes complete sense to me. And number 1, the Dorset grave. The Dorset mass grave is one of the scariest and confusing archaeological discoveries ever discovered. Let me ask you, what's more fun than a barrel of monkeys? You might be thinking a barrel of Vikings? No, I'm thinking about a mass grave full of headless Viking bodies. No? Okay, well you and I find different things very fun, I suppose. Way back, all the way back in 2008, a group of archaeologists were on a fairly routine digging operation in Dorset, a quaint little seaside town in England. They were supervising a digging operation to improve local roads and were on set to see if there was anything of note to find. You know, maybe an old coin or an arrowhead. And for the first few days of the job, nothing noteworthy was really coming up until they came across the mass pile of 54 entangled Viking corpses, all missing their heads. I guess that was kind of noteworthy. If it was just a bunch of headless Viking bodies, that would be one thing, but the mass grave was just riddled in confusing details. Their skulls were missing, but as well, their rib cages, arm, and leg bones were all scattered around, surrounded by discarded teeth. There were no clothes or weaponry to be found at all. So what in Odin's name happened here, because absolutely nothing I can imagine is pleasant. My first thought is that this was some sort of insane Event Horizon-esque scenario where a bunch of Vikings opened up a portal to hell and had a blood party. The teeth found around the grave had all been filed down neatly as if a craftsman had done it. Now it goes without saying that, Viking dental surgery was not going to be a painless process, meaning this had to be excruciating, suggesting it was either done by a very careful tormentor or it was done to themselves to intimidate opponents by showing how gritty and fierce they are. Could not tell you which one is better. Now as good as my theory about a bunch of Vikings opening up a Hellraiser scenario or something is, archaeologists had some different ideas. They theorized that looking at the wounds on the ribs and the torso, that they were very surgical blows, which isn't really what you'd expect from a rabid Viking brawl. The archaeologists thought that these men were either offered up as part of a horrifying sadistic ritual, or it was a big time mass sentencing where everybody was rounded up and sentenced to death. Explains too where all the weapons and gear had gone, as these men had been brought here and then left there for a very, very long time. Anyone else feel like that also kind of sounds like it might be the world's most terrifying puzzle to try and put together, trying to figure out where all those bones go? Maybe just me? Maybe I've been working on this channel too long and my sense of humor has been changed permanently.